All right. God bless you all. You know, some local guys that have seen some of the videos that I've shared, they're like, hey, you use this technique. I've never tried that before. Talk to me about what you think about when you do that. So that's kind of what this video is going to be. But the technique that we're going to talk about is fishing a crankbait around rock. Okay. I'm just going to honestly tell you right off the bat, I've used all kinds of different crankbaits, okay, over the years. I've been blessed to be bass fishing for most of my life, ever since moved to the United States. And when I was a kid, when we lived overseas in Puerto Rico, my dad, he loved bass fishing. So anytime we came to visit and we were able to go for a little while, then I enjoyed going bass fishing. That's something that my dad, while he was still with me, he's pretty much the one that introduced me to it. So as I got a little bit older and I spent more time on the lake, then these are things that I've learned for myself. These aren't things that somebody, you know, showed me every bit of this. There's been bits and pieces over the years that I've put together, and then, like a good buddy of mine's told me, I put my time in. And that's what I'm gonna try to pass on to you, and hopefully not make this video very long. But I've had a lot of people ask me here lately, you know, specifically about, man, when you use those certain crankbaits, how do you do? So I'm trying to make these videos a little more specific about how to do different techniques, things that maybe I was doing that I didn't even realize I was doing. I'm really trying to focus and pay attention so that I can help and I can share these different things. So the bait right off the bat that we're going to talk about, and like I said, I don't get sponsored, and you've seen me using it in here the last few videos, is Pro Rock Crawler. In my opinion, probably the best, literally like its name says, rock crawling crankbait. You can use any crankbait you want to tick the rocks, bounce the rocks, ricochet off the rocks, however you want to word it. But in my opinion, the rock crawler is number one in its efficiency, number one as far as most successful in getting it in and out of those rocks. It's just a plastic bait, so yes, you're going to break it at times, but it's amazing how much one can go through. And on top of that, it was probably there for several years, probably the number one fish catching bait that there was throughout the United States, I'm sure. It could have been everywhere else, I'm sure too, but I know for a fact in the area that I live and places like Cumberland, everybody was using it, you know, and some people were successful with it, some people were not. I started off fishing it, and that's one of the fish that you saw in one of these pictures. I was blessed to catch a pretty good sized smallmouth. It was well over a keeper smallmouth. And that was my first experience with the rock crawler. Ever since, I've tried and I've caught different things, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But the key that we're going to talk about is specifically fishing it around rock. And it's like I'm saying, I'm trying my best to not make this a very long video and just give you information that'll help you. Okay, so let's talk about a crankbait that we're going to use specifically, like the name says, rock crawling. Number one, I'm going to tell you my experience of this crankbait for what I use it for, and maybe that'll help you understand how I literally use this and how I'm successful with this crankbait. You could take this crankbait and just go out, tie it onto whatever rod you have, reel it down, bang it into a few rocks and catch fish, okay? But if you really want to learn to use this bait to be successful with it, and not that I'm more successful than the average person, I'm just saying this is what I do with it. I use this crankbait as a jig while I'm looking for fish. That's what I use this bait for, okay? To me, this crankbait specific, and the one that I've been using a lot here lately, is this one here, which I've got tied up on the setup that I'm going to talk to you about too, okay? This is the Rock Crawler 50 DD, which pretty much means deep diver. Okay, not a very big crankbait. It goes 8 to 12 feet on 10-pound line. Most of the time I have it on 15. I'm not real worried about getting this to its max depths. That's something we're going to talk about too. But this little crankbait here is amazing. Going through wood, it's not the best. It works, but it's not the best. Now going over rock cover, that's a whole different story. And we're talking rock, we're talking about chunk rock that would be like going down a riprap bank, that basically they've laid all that rock down so that it doesn't wash out the edge of the river or streams, or even some of the lakes near the dams and places like that. That's the type we're talking. When we talk about rock, we're talking about anything from gravel all the way up to, say, 1 foot by 1 foot rock. Now, if you have these bigger boulders that are 2 or 3 big around, it'll bounce around those and come through them. But specifically that size rock, maybe 1 foot by foot all the way down to gravel. This little bait right here is pretty impressive how it works. The way that it's designed, and if you actually listen to Mike McClellan, who actually designed this bait and basically is responsible for this bait, us even having it to fish with through Spro, you'll see that he combined a lot of different crankbaits together basically to come up with this one. And of course everybody automatically just knock off. But this little bait right here has a lot of qualities in it that a lot of other crankbaits don't have. When you get into some of the crankbaits, they have a tighter wiggle and they still go deep. Like a Bandit 300. You would think, well, it's the same thing. Well, I'm gonna tell you it's not. The Bandit has a lot tighter wiggle, and it doesn't necessarily stay on the bottom as good as this little bait does. The little Bandit tends to come up a lot quicker as soon as you stop reeling it, which the technique that I'm going to tell you about, it kind of stops that a little bit. One of the other things that I'm going to talk to you a little bit about is, like I was telling you, this to me, a jig, when you throw a jig out, say a 3-ounce to 1/2 ounce jig, when you throw that jig out and you're sitting there and you're working it, you're allowing that jig to bounce on those different rocks. If you feel it kind of hang up, you're shaking it and you're getting that to barely come over that rock. If you really know how to fish a jig, then that's what you're doing with that jig. The problem is that with that jig, you have to slowly either drag it like a football jig and let it bounce around and come through that cover, or you're taking that jig and you're slowly creeping it and crawling it through all this stuff, okay? That's not efficient until you know where the fish are, or until you have a pretty good idea where the fish are, okay? So friends of mine that have seen me throwing crankbaits for the last several years, they're like, man, I don't understand it. How did you get to where you are now with the crankbait when before you just threw a spinnerbait and a jig? That's what you did a lot. And when you threw a crankbait, you threw a square bill. Now it seems like you throw a crankbait more often and you catch a lot more fish than you used to. And I'm like, well, it's because one day something happened to me that I started having troubles with my shoulders, and I couldn't really sit there and shake that jig the way that I wanted to and creep it through those rocks so much. Plus, I wasn't getting very many bites doing that. So I started thinking, and it got real windy one day, and I picked up one of these rock crawlers and a couple other crankbaits that I have, and I started slowing down. Instead of just sitting there burning that crankbait like I used to, I started slowing down. And it's different, and it's very hard for me to explain, but I'm gonna try to. So I'm covering water with a crankbait, but I'm literally fishing that crankbait like I used to fish my jig. So when I am keeping it on the bottom, I think where a lot of people struggle the most when I have these conversations with people is, like I told you, this crankbait here, this is an RK50, okay? It goes from 8 to 12 feet on 10-pound line. So on this 15-pound line, we'll say it gets to 10 feet, okay? So if this bait gets to 10 feet, a lot of people, what they're going to do is they're going to take this little bait right here and they're going to go up on a flat somewhere that's about 3 or 4 foot deep, and they're going to take and throw this out, and they're literally going to ground this on the bottom. And you're going to say, well, yeah, I've caught fish doing that. And I understand, okay, that you've caught fish doing that. But I'm going to give you a situation that's going to hopefully broaden your mind just a little bit. When you have this bait and it's meant to go 10 foot deep, and you're bringing that bait at a pretty good pace. I'm not saying burning it, I'm just saying at a pretty good pace. You're keeping that bait on the bottom, okay, constantly. Is it hitting a rock? Yes. When it hits a rock, it goes this way. When it hits a rock, it goes this way. But the problem is you're keeping that bait on the bottom. Here's what happens. When you get into an area that instead of it being 5 feet or less, that area is now 5 to 8 feet or 10 feet, the diving depth of this bait, instead of it hitting like this to where it's staying on the bottom, okay, is now hitting this, because that's its max depth at 10 feet. So it's just barely ticking some of those rocks here and there, okay? So instead of when you sit there and you get that maximum depth, you really need to ease off reeling, stuttering it, or reel it a couple times. And what happens is when you stop reeling this bait, see if I can do this sideways. When you're throwing this crankbait like this and it's hitting that gravel, rock, whatever it is, when you stop, it's backing up just this much, and then it's going back again, and then it's backing up and going back again. It's not backing up way up here. It's just, if you watch it in a pool, if you'll throw this bait in a pool and watch it, you can literally count the seconds. So when you hit something, give it a second, let it back up just a hair. It's coming up just enough to where if you watch videos of how a little crawdad does in the bottom, or a little bait fish that's distressed, that has issues, that's what they do. They'll go for a little bit and they'll stop, and they'll go for a little bit and they'll stop. You wonder why in wintertime that type of technique seems to work. A lot of people don't realize this, but your jig, that's what it's doing, okay? A lot of people, this all of a sudden just one day just came to mind, and I was like, wow, that I never thought about it. But if you watch your jig does the opposite. Your jig stays on the bottom because it's dead weight. But when you sit there and shake it, you hop it up. And then when you stop, it goes down, okay? Bass usually hits it. When you hop it up, pow, he grabs it, okay? When you take your crankbait and you treat it like a jig, you're basically doing the same action on the bottom. It's going little by little, okay? And when you stop and start, or you hit those rocks, you're freeing that bait from that constant movement, okay? When you give it that second, that fish comes up and nails it, because he's catching that in midair. When that little bait fish, he feels like, or crawdad, whatever it is, when it's in midair or mid-water, but just so we can comprehend this is how my mind works, okay? When it's in midair to where it's not attached to the bottom, that bass comes in and absorbs it, sucks it up, and gives him time to take that bait in. Same thing he does with your jig. You're working your jig, you get it on a hop, all of a sudden that bass, when it's in mid-flight or mid-hop, he sucks that thing in, and that's all of a sudden all you feel is the dead weight. Well, with a crankbait, and he sucks this in, guess what? He's got those treble hooks, and those treble hooks, because of the way that you're reeling and you're constant, then all of a sudden your rod blows up, okay? So this technique works, but you have to pay attention to what you're doing. Does that mean that you have to get on a bank that's laid out just perfect? No, you don't. But this technique works really good. Does it mean that you can't throw it up in 2 foot of water? You can throw this bait up in 2 foot of water. and going down a little incline and start your retrieve. But in your mind, you need to realize that this bait dives as soon as you start cranking. So what does that mean? That means that my cranking needs to be slower around the edge of the bank, and I probably need to do more start. When I feel it hit, I need to slow up on it. Reel, stop, reel, stop, reel, stop, until I get it away. And the less I can feel the bottom, the faster I want to reel it a little bit, because I want to keep it down on the bottom. I'm not talking about giving it and counting it to 10 or your bait's going to be 3 foot up. Okay, we're just giving it just that brief stop. You reel it for a little bit, stop, reel it for a little bit, stop. What is that going to do? That's going to do the same thing around that edge. Now, I told you that I use this kind of like my jig. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that this is literally my search bait. Now, a lot of people right now, they use their electronics for their search bait. That's what they do. Okay, they don't even start fishing until they've looked on their special system and they look forward, oh, there's fish, I'm going to fish there. Well, in the old days, we didn't have a lot of that. Yes, we had sonars and we had different things that we kind of guessed there might be fish, but we actually used to use baits like this in order to cover water. Once you started catching fish in a certain area, then guess what? I'm going to take, after I catch 2 or 3 fish in one little area, I'm going to slow down. And I'm going to pick up my regular jig, which the colors are pretty similar to this jig. And I'm going to throw it and I'm going to drag it around. Why? Because I may actually be able to pick up a couple bigger fish. I may be able to pick up 2 or 3 more fish in that area. Why? But how did I find them? I found them with this. Okay, that's why a lot of my buddies are like, man, I can't understand it. Why do you cover so much water? And I'm like, well, because years ago when I would go places like Cumberland, we would find the fish at the end of the day. And I'm like, man, you know, we always fish them. We used to joke about it all the time. How we always find fish at the end of the day. Guess what that meant? We covered a lot of water. And then eventually we would come into the fish, because a lot of times they were schooled up in one little area. With the crankbait, I just cover more water a little more efficiently, okay? Because I can go through a section. I'm not saying I'm burning down that bank, but I can fish specific features with this right here. If I know there's a stump or 2 and there's a transition, then I just fish the transition and move on. You know, because I think I'm looking for high potential areas. If I start catching them on transitions, then that's what I'm going to fish, is transitions. I'm going to throw this through there. If I catch 1 or 2, I'm going to stop. I'm going to pitch my jig in there and drag it a little bit. Sometimes I'll pick one up, sometimes I don't. If I don't, then I go back to this and I keep going until I find that area. But the process that I'm telling you is what I've been using for several years now to basically not just find fish, but to do better with a crankbait. You know, if I'm fishing in water that's super clear, then most of the time here lately I'm going to use this smaller one, because in my experience, this bait right here that does have smaller size, they don't get a good look at it. It's going to come through the water bouncing around and a little more erratic. A lot of times that's what triggers the response for them to attack it. Okay, I better grab that before it gets away. That's kind of the mentality that I'm banking on when I'm throwing these baits like I've been doing. Now, this one here is this rock, the Spro rock crawler. This is the 55. Okay, and I haven't fished them in a while, but I've kept a few around, and I've picked up a few again, because I wanted to speak up specific colors. Now, I used to just get the solid colors, the bright ones, a lot of that, but anymore I find myself fishing in a lot of clear water, so I've started to get a lot of the ones that are translucent this time. And I've learned that as you go bigger with these baits, if you go around in that clear water, and it's interesting to me because even with the rock crawler, the 55, I get asked a lot, man, you still get bit on those rock crawlers? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I've still caught fish on them. There's like, man, how do you get bit on them? You know, I throw them and I get hung up a lot. Well, I actually watched a little YouTube video not too long ago that made me realize a lot of the mistakes that I was doing too. And the actual one who makes this crankbait mentioned it. Said, you know, a lot of people talk about hanging up the rock crawler 55. And one of the things that I notice a lot of people do is they sit there and they throw it up in 2 foot of water, And they get this hung up because, like I was saying, they're winding it. They got their 7-to-1 reels, which we'll talk about here in a second. But they use their 7-to-1 reels, and they throw this crankbait, and they grind, and they're all up on the bank, and they take their boat like everybody says to do, and they got their boat in a 45, and they're up throwing that thing in 5 foot of water. And here they've got a rock crawler 55, 9 to 14 foot depth. So on 15, it's going 12. And they're banging this around 5 or 6 foot, and like I said, that crankbait's never doing more than this right here. It's all it's doing the whole time. And they're like, I don't understand it, I don't get bit. Well, that's because, yes, you're filling the bottom, but the problem is you're keeping that on the bottom way too much. Are there times that, yes, that's probably, yeah, but they've got to really be wanting to eat. But what you need is you need to have that jig mentality again, and that's just what I use. That bait's got to hit that bottom and get a little bit of space. It's like, man, you're talking about slowing down with a crankbait a little bit to do that. In my experience, most people need to quit fishing every bait like they do burning a rattle trap. Everybody wants to fish a bait fast. We hear the words cover water, and we think that means put on a reel that's got a 8-to-1 gear ratio, and son, just burn it down the bank. And everybody sees these pros doing it, and they think, well, that's the way we're supposed to do it. This reel right here, okay, has a 6.8 gear ratio. Does it take up line pretty fast? It takes it up faster than my 5 to 6, okay? When to use this reel? In the summertime, the springtime, late spring, and early fall like we are right now. In the winter, go to 5 to 6 because I slow way down. Still catch fish all the way up to crankbaits. I caught fish last year in 38, and I think 36 degree water on a crankbait. Okay, I actually caught 3 that day on the same lake. So it's not like it was just one random one. I actually caught 3 that day. And they were largemouth too. So around smallmouth, who knows, could have done even better. But that's a whole nother story in itself. The problem is that people want to use, okay, a 8-to-1 gear ratio because they see these people on TV using. And I get asked that a lot too. And I'm like, look, what you got to understand is their trolling motor, next time you go to watch some of these big tournaments to where they're actually throwing crankbaits, now it's very rare to see them do it. But if you actually watch them, watch some of the older episodes, even on YouTube, look at how fast their trolling motor is going. Their trolling motor is probably set on, if they have a speed of 10, it's sitting on 8 or 9. They're going down the bank so fast that it's unreal. That 8-to-1 reel that they're using, they're picking up lines so fast that honestly, the speed that they're actually pulling their bait back to the boat is pretty similar to the same speed that I am. And you're like, wow, I never thought about that. Yeah, and a lot of times they don't even think about that, but they'll say it. They'll be like, oh yeah, I don't really go with the 6 no more like them old guys did because, you know, I'm going down the bank and I just never feel like it hitting bottom. Well, of course you never feel like it hit the bottom because your boat's going faster than your crankbait is. And you're supposed to be going down the bank covering water. So the way they do it is to make it more efficient. They get those 8-to-1 crankbait reels because they don't let off the trolling motor the whole time. I don't mind letting off the trolling motor. I'll make a cast or two and fish the same little area. I've shared videos with it before. I've made 15 casts of the same tree before and all of a sudden caught one. Sometimes I do and don't get it. Same thing with a crankbait. I may throw 2 or 3 times down the same stretch. What am I doing? If I'm looking down that bank at a 45, I may make one right down beside the bank. I may make another one about 5 foot out, and I may make another one about 10 foot away from the bank with that 14 footer, that bigger rock crawler. I said, what are you doing? I'm covering the water depths is what I'm doing. So I'm doing the same technique I'm telling you. You know, I may have this tied up on this setup, and I may have that rock crawler that goes deeper on a different setup, or I may have a DT6 and then a DT10 or a DT8. I may have a DT4 for those real shallow ones, and then I may have a DT8 because I'm covering the different depths. And am I still ticking? Sure, when I throw up on the bank, that 4-footer is ticking, that DT6 is ticking that edge. This little smaller rock crawler, it's ticking the edge of those things. But out here in 7 foot of water, 8 foot of water, it's just kind of in the middle. It's not really banging anything. It's not knocking on anything. If I go down to that rock crawler and I throw it right up on the bank, then I've got to really slow it down to work it, to cover, and I may reel and stop to get that bait different action to come through there. I still don't want it to sit there and hover because I don't want the fish to get a good look at it if it's clear water. If it's muddy water, then I'll bring it at a decent pace, but I'll slow it down even more during muddy water, because in muddy water I'm not worried about them seeing it. In clear water is when I'm worried about them seeing it. That's definitely when I go to these smaller ones, and I do bring it at a fairly speed down there. One of the other things you have to think about though when you're fishing around those rocks, a lot of times we think, well, I can just use a medium heavy rod and I can put monofilament, it'll do fine. Well, it may and it may not, because I throw this right here. This is the one I've been using a lot here lately. This is a Falcon Cara. This is 7 foot medium action, and it's literally called the Cranker. It was designed by the same man who designed these Spro rock crawlers. And I'm gonna tell you something. It has a super slow reaction time, but it also has something that I didn't think about. We all spend our money on a jig rod because of what? Because I want to feel everything that jig's doing, right? Well, for years I threw a fiberglass rod, and I liked the fiberglass rod because it allowed the fish to get the bait a lot better. But the problem is that you really can't feel those rocks as you're reeling it across them. Okay, you can kind of feel some things, but not as good. And I didn't realize this until I had to trade in those fiberglass rods because they were heavier on my shoulders. When I got this rod, this Falcon Cara, it's so sensitive once I put my fluorocarbon line on here that I realized, oh wow, not only is this lighter, still has good backbone, still has good action. And this is what I've been throwing my crankbaits on quite a bit here lately. I'm like, I can feel everything that crankbait does now. Like, I can literally tell what's rock and what's wood and what was that. It'll come over it and I didn't feel anything. It's amazing because it changes how you fish it. So once again, remember, I'm throwing this like a jig. So just like a jig, and you want to feel what that thing's doing, I want to feel what this crankbait's doing. So all of this together, that softer rod tip, because this is a graphite rod, that softer rod tip, this 6 to 8 reel lets me reel slow and lets me keep that bait on the bottom, but not grinded, pegged to the bottom. Okay, it lets me reel and stop and lets me give it that second or two where it comes off the bottom at least a couple inches. Okay, when I feel it hit a rock or two, I can give it a pause, and if there's something around it, he can't hit it, he can't help it. If a smallmouth's following behind it and all of a sudden bam, 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 you hit that rock, sometimes he's just down there waiting for it to do something different. When you stop and that thing all of a sudden backs up and comes back at him, bam, he'll nail it. So all this set up together, following this technique that I'm telling you, is the best way that I've learned on how to fish a crankbait effectively and efficiently on rock. Now, you can use a lot of this concept with wood, you can use a lot of these things, but you really, in my mind, it helps me think about it like a jig. And that's basically what I started doing. Now I throw this until I find active fish on that bank, and then when I come back to that bank, if I catch 4 or 5 on 100-foot stretch, then I'm going to come back through there and I'm going to pick up my jig and I'm going to take my time. Because if I fish for 3 or 4 hours and hey, the only bites I got was way back there when I started on that one little stretch, then now I've given that place another hour or two to calm down. I'm going to go back with my jig down that spot and see what I can get. And I've been surprised a couple times and actually caught bigger fish the second time around. You know, sometimes I'll go back and there's nothing there. But you'll be amazed at how these fish stay in a little 100-foot stretch. And you'll be amazed that no, there is no magic bait. They all don't pick up all the bass. Now, you can have a Ned rig and different things. They'll work a lot better. And sometimes I'll do that. You know, sometimes you'll see me that I'll go through a bank fishing a crankbait, and I'll go back with a Ned rig down that same stretch and pick up 4 or 5 fish that I didn't even know was there. So anyway, though, I think I've covered everything that I was thinking about sharing with everybody. I've tried my best to explain the technique that I'm doing. Hopefully it'll help you all. Hopefully it'll help people catch a few more fish. Hopefully it'll help you, if nothing else, make you think a little bit and be like, huh, I never thought about fishing a bait like that. If it does, then I'm telling you, just honestly, you need to thank the Lord Jesus, because he's the one who basically has come to me and slowed me down in my life to where I've realized that, man, I've always just going and going and going. It was time for me to slow down a little bit and just start enjoying what I was doing out there. And the more I do that while I'm fishing, I've noticed the more successful I am. You know, when I really started looking and paying attention what was going on, but not stressing about it, just, I wonder if this would work, and experimenting and doing different things, I've started to develop a system that I enjoy. Like I said, a lot of my friends, they're like, man, years ago, man, you used to just go with the spinnerbait if it was windy, and if it wasn't, you just do that jig and just drug it around all day long. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And I maybe get 3 or 4 bites. And to a jig guy that fishes tournaments or wants to fish tournaments, that's all he's looking for is 5 keeper fish so that he can take to that weigh-in in that tournament. I get it. But to an old man like me who has a day or 2 off a week and just wants to go fishing, I'm okay with catching 15 or 20 12-inchers on a crankbait one day on a topwater on a jig. I don't have to catch, but it's amazed me how many not only little ones I've caught, but also pretty good sized fish with basically the same technique. And it's something that in the fall right now especially is going to be very important. And you'll see me throughout the winter, hopefully. I was blessed to do it last year, and if good Lord allows me this year, I'll do it again. I thought crankbait pretty much all winter long. Like I said, I've throwed it. I mean, I threw it until I'm pretty sure it was either 38 or 36 degree water last year that I was throwing a crankbait. You know, there wasn't very many more degrees and that water was going to start freezing. But do you have to slow down? Yeah, you have to slow quite a bit down. But I was blessed to catch quite a few at those temperatures. And anyway, don't want to make this video longer than it already is, but I hope it does help. Thank you everybody who shares the videos. Thank you everybody who watches the videos. Any questions that you have, feel free to ask me. I'll try my best to answer your question. I'll try my best to, I've got people several times a week that message me on Messenger on Facebook, or they'll message me even on the comments on these, be like, hey, I got a question about this. And like I said, I'll try my best to help, because I feel like the Lord helped me, then I should help everybody else too. Anyway, hope this helps you. Just take your time and have fun when you're out there. You just be surprised, you know. Sure has blessed me and been a blessing to me for many years. I hope it blesses you all. And more than anything, I hope Jesus for every fish you catch. Don't forget, Jesus loves you. Y'all have a blessed day.